Just before we hit record, you said, "Hey, I'm going to clean up my act." And I thought, well, you'd be the first guest who's ever cleaned up your act on this podcast.
Well, it's going to be good.
Well, I've had other guests who said, "Hey, what's the possibility we can go back and edit something that I said?" I said, "Are you afraid of like your church is going to listen to this or something?" Or, well, I just never know, And so we have done that one time for one guy, because even when I listened back to it, I thought, I don't even know that I would have went that far, and I'm pretty transparent, dude. But you were out there a ways. You were kind of ranting, So if one of your elders are on a podcast junkie, you're screwed,
dude. You mentioned names.
You call out names and tithing reports, So.
Oh well, if you're the guy that takes down Chris Brown, more power to you. I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing anyway.
Isn't that the truth for all of us?
Yes, sir.
That's what I loved about our first conversation, and is just, it wasn't self-deprecation. I didn't take it that's not what I mean to say it, but it was just self-awareness, right? Self-awareness. But before we jumped on this, well, I'll tell you what's the dichotomy about that. Oh, it's been recording for a minute and a half.
Yeah. Good stuff's going to come out.
There's no. In case you were thinking we're doing an introduction like today, I'm talking to Pastor Chris Brown from North Coast Church in San Diego. We don't. That's all I did. I just did that right now, 12 seconds ago. The last time we talked, though, I love the fact that we ended the conversation, and how I want to begin the conversation today, talking about something really important. And that's because I just finished in the last hour and a half, 2 hours, working on some web copy for the Authentic Pastor, trying to constantly tweak the messaging of what the issue is. And we've been talking for the last 2 hours here in the office about well-being and self-care, which 85% of pastors say they don't practice, and only 15% say they practice well. So I'm just assuming the other 85%, like me, don't practice it at all. But takes me to the question of, have you been fishing lately? That's the question I've got.
Oh, I have had an opportunity to get out, and I had some amazing fishing too. We got into a bluefin bite just off the coast. A buddy of mine chartered a big boat for his clients and some of his main employees. And he's like, I want you on the boat. And he got a hold of me like 9 months ago. He's all, I've tried this before. I can never get you. So at the beginning of the year, he said, I want you to set it up. These are the dates. Block it on your calendar. And we start getting up to it. And I'm like, why am I taking these 3 days? I can't afford to take these 3 days. But I go out and we get into the bluefin tuna. And we hit our 3-day limit within a day and a half. We get 144 bluefin tuna on board. And it is amazing. And
that's the limit? So, 144?
We had 24 guys, two fish a day, 3 days. So 6 times 24.
Oh, so
144 is the limit.
You were out on a big boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like when I go out on a charter, like in Lake Michigan, there's like 3 of us, right?
Yeah.
And then there's 2 of us because they have to take me back to shore because I'm throwing up and chumming. And like,
it happens.
I don't do well, on
and then we have 2 campuses down in Mexico. One is English speaking, one is Spanish speaking. It's down in a little tiny city in between Cabo and La Paz called Los Barriles. And so we needed to do some work with our campuses and leadership down there. So I took a couple of our guys and we got to fish 2 days down there and catch some dorado and have fun on the water. So I've got 2 great fishing experiences in the last 3 months, which makes my heart full.
I was writing a worksheet handout download today for a course I just got done recording on embracing your identity. And the whole point of that session of the course was, you're more than a pastor. And I really push pastors to quit introducing yourself as pastor. And I mean,
why would you do it anyway?
Why would you introduce yourself as pastor? I don't
Yeah. I
know.
mean, I've never introduced myself as the pastor.
You know what really drives me crazy is when I get an email from pastor who signs it pastor. We're colleagues. We're peers. You
Yeah.
sent me you sent me an email about an issue you're dealing with and you signed it like the Reverend Most High Chris Brown.
Yeah. Well, here's a weirder one. I was asked to speak at a men's conference at a pastor's church, very large, well known, and we had a dinner ahead of time with 11 guys on his staff in this private boardroom. We weren't allowed to speak to him without calling him pastor. Couldn't use a first name. His
Seriously.
staff won't, not allowed to. And I was told ahead of time, if you refer to him, you have to. And I was like, well, I'm one too. Do you get it? Why'd you call me Chris? But I'm like, what do we need that title and that platform needs to be a part of who we are? Like you said, your identity, that's not your identity. That's your
Yeah.
vocation.
Well, so I was going to say that one of the things I wrote on this workshop was I asked pastors, how do you integrate your hobbies and your interests and everything into ministry? And you were just talking about going to Mexico with your staff and going fishing while you're there. That's a way that you integrate your whole self into
Mm,
what you do, as opposed to separating them out into do different parts of you, which is just duality and nonsense. But I don't even allow people in my church to use the word pastor. I'll tell you a really funny
yep.
story about my youngest son, who you just met here producing the podcast. So I don't think my kids, I have two sons, 28 and 25, they had ever in their childhood heard me called pastor. It's not a phrase we use
Hmm.
at home. Um, it's not a phrase we use in our congregation for any staff, regardless of your role. So Kelton must have been 6, 7, maybe somewhere in there. And we sat down for lunch on a Sunday at home. And he says to my wife, Cindy, he said, somebody called dad a bad name today at church. She said, what do you mean they called daddy a bad name? They called him a pastor.
You
And so
pastor.
he's thinking like bastard, you know?
You pastor.
And so I was proud that my 6-year-old knew the word bastard, but
Yeah.
not pastor, you know? I thought
Yeah.
I'm
That's
doing
good.
something, I'm doing
That's good
something
parenting.
right, you know?
We say
Well,
it all the time around here. Hey, we don't use the P word. When people come up, hey, we don't use the P word. And okay, so listen to this. When we do it, what are we telling our congregation? Now, do all the people in our congregation need to come up and go, I'm Drywaller Bill. You know what? I'm Carpenter John. You know what? I'm fourth grade teacher Janet. You know what? I'm truck driver. Why? Or are we trying to gain a level of respect, a level of authority that we feel like we need? Because no one else does that in life. Well, doctors do. And I'm like, well, you're going to a doctor, but when your doctor is no longer in the office, he doesn't walk around and call himself Dr. Jim. There's
you know,
something unique about that.
after a doctor does a prostate exam with me, we're on first name basis. That's all
Yep.
there's to it, you know.
Yeah, I'm not
I
even going there.
I call my doctors by their first name. I just had a skin cancer
Yeah.
appointment. Every 6 months, my skin cancer doctor she slices something off of me. When you take a scalpel to my body twice a year, your name is Gretchen. That's what your
Yeah.
name is, you
That's
know?
it.
And so that's what I do. But I said in this particular lesson, and it wasn't of me. I think God gave me something that I can really build on here, that when we elevate, we separate.
Yep.
And so
100%.
I hear pastors all the time going, I don't have any real interaction, connection, friendships with the congregation. And I just want to hang out in their church for a weekend and hear how many people address them by their title and how often they address themselves or the rest of their team by their title. No wonder you feel alienated and isolated and separated.
Yeah.
You've done it to yourself because you're compensating, which sounds very indicting, but you're compensating for some incompetency or insecurity for sure. If you feel the need for people to address you, don't give me that BS about it being a thing of honor, because everyone in my congregation and your congregation and the body of Christ, we're all called to Christ. That's our calling.
Yeah.
And then we have a gifting and then we have an assignment.
Yeah.
And we've got that completely out of whack, talking about our calling, our calling, our calling. And I grew up with a dad who would say that the highest, most holy calling is pastoral ministry.
Hmm.
Clearly, he was a pastor. And so
Hmm.
I was jilted from the very beginning with that idea.
Yeah. We do a thing called brownies with the Browns. It's kind of our welcome dessert. Before you've been coming to North Coast for a while, you want to know why we do what we do, how we do it. Brownies with the Browns. It was started way before me with predecessors. We just changed it to fit our name. And I do a little 10-minute elevator speech at the beginning. This is what you need to know about North Coast before you plant roots. I really am trying to talk people into a different church. You know, boy, I say here's 4 things you're not going to like about North Coast right up front, because we don't want you to get in, make friends, then find out about it, and then it's hard to get you to leave, or you want to take people with you. And then my wife and my kids join me on stage. We got like a little living room set up, and it's Q&A. Anything you want to ask my kids, anything you want to ask Amy, and we do about 45 minutes of just Q&A. Anything about the church, our marriage, relationship, everything is just wide open to this group. And one of the things I say in my elevator speech right up front, one of the very first things I said, you got to know something about North Coast. We believe that one guy gets to pastor this church, and you don't question that guy. You don't talk back to that guy. You honor and respect him. He makes all decisions, and all of his decisions are final. When you die and rise again, you get to be that guy. Until then, that job's taken. It's not ours. None of us are the shepherd and the pastor of North Coast. We share it. You're going to hear why we share titles, why we share offices, why we share decision making, because we believe one guy gets that honor and that title, and it's his church, and it's not ours. It's just not ours. And that's my opening speech at our welcome dessert, that you're not going to find this holy guy or this holy person myth. Well, the pastor has to be at the hospital, or the pastor has to do the baptism. The pastor is the one that does communion. Because when we set our churches up like that, of course, then we isolate ourselves. We separate ourselves
Yep.
because you're the guy that has to. You're the guy that has to. And I'm like, I just have a teaching gift. I've got a pretty good locker room personality. And outside of that, I'm no good at this church. There are people that run this church, administrate this church, lead. You want my little narrative puppet show for teaching? That's great. If you don't like it, probably somewhere else. And then I'm a good locker room guy, but I'm not about to lead this thing or say I'm the guy. That job's been taken for 2,000 years.
You know,
Hmm.
I would like to think, and sometimes I'm, jilted because I read all kinds of surveys and information from pastors, because this is all I deal with is their authenticity, their transparency, vulnerability, those whole issues of well-being. And just 80% would not be able, that might be high, but a significant number would not be able to have that kind of confidence and security. And I'm still trying to figure that out, why. And I mean, I know systemically, systematically, organizationally, all of it, we have created this culture.
Yeah,
But
we are the most insecure group I know.
oh, I was just
And
going to
there's
say that
the
I don't
reasons for that is a leadership is tough on any
anywhere.
marketplace, any sector. Leadership is tough. You got to make decisions. There's a lot of burden on that. Then you put that leadership into a person that speaks in front of large crowds, whether that crowd is 50, 500, or 1,500. You're speaking in front of a crowd, but you're not teaching. You're not doing a lecture. You're doing the word of God. So now you've got this spiritual authority burden that we put upon ourselves. And so now I'm a leader, I'm a public figure and communicator, and it's the very word of God. Then people start thanking me about the
Mm-hmm.
work the Spirit is doing in their life and the spiritual authority that I am. And this is why I loved when we first connected, to go, if we are not careful, we are going to try to live up to that. And our insecurities know I'm not that great of a leader. I'm not that much of a spiritual giant. I'm not the intellectual. If you knew how much preparation and how much other sermons I ripped off to make this one you heard today, people see 1% of Chris, and it is my best 1%. It is me on stage in my giftedness, hopefully the giver using that giftedness. That is 1% of me. I'm in my best clothes. I've showered that day. I've prepped more than anything else I've done that week. I've delivered it, and they're like, that's Chris. And anyone that knows me is like, well, that's a part of the guy. but that's not him. And if we live up to that line in front of us, we gradually think, oh, I'm that guy. I'm that guy. And then we love the titles. We love the popularity. We love the prestige. We love all that comes with it. We can't live up to it. And that's why the depression rate is so high amongst us, because we're incredibly insecure. We think our giftedness is who we are, and we try to portray and live up to it. And we want people to respond to us in our giftedness. And it's a myth. That's not who you are.
You know, I had a very interesting email last week, and somebody sent me a question I had sent out, and we may wade into this topic. I sent out in the last couple of weeks some emails about transparency,
Hmm.
and I alluded to the idea of pastors having to be perfect. And his response to me, which is a really good question, he said, is that a real issue, or is that a mystique that we have actually made up in our mind that past people want their pastors to be perfect? And I thought, I would have said before you asked me the question that yes, there's significant truth to that. But then I got thinking maybe it's only as much truth as we propagate.
100%.
Or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I mean, is it what people really expect of us, or have we actually created that mystique or that conversation ourselves in our minds, and now we carry it forward?
I think it's a little of both. I think people expect their pastor to actually be living the life that they're preaching about, to actually be doing the things that you're teaching us. That's not perfect, but I would say that most congregations would have it. Who in this building right now is actually living this out? They would probably say the pastor is. We would expect he's actually living this out. The type of marriage he talks about, the type of parenting that he or she is doing, we expect that they're living that. So there's a little, it's not perfect. There's an expectation that's higher, but I think most of it's what we create, because we
Well,
don't
and
share my own vulnerabilities, my own failures. And so the
if
congregation
there
is like, whoa, you are perfect.
well, so the area that I think that we are guilty of propagating that is when we don't preach what we practice. And I said that about a year ago in my own pulpit. I said, I'm not here to practice what I preach. I will only preach what I practice. And I thought, dang, that was pretty good. I should write that down. That wasn't too bad, you know? And I actually said it this last Sunday as I'm talking about the busyness and the stress of the holidays, and this series that I called The Ugly Sweaters of Christmas. And one of them is when sweaters shrink and it's confining and it's the stress of the holidays. And I was very clear to go, I don't experience the stress of the holidays, because when most of you ask me over for a holiday gathering, my answer is no, because I know it's just going to wig me out, because I can't, I can't go to all of them. I mean, the one I want to go to is the guy who makes his own rum chata. That's the one I want to go, and I've not been invited to it yet this year. So I'm really irritated by that one. But, I'm only going to preach what I practice. And I'll tell my congregation that, hey, I suck at this. If you're
Yeah.
looking for the perfect example of, every morning on my knees in the word, in prayer, you're going to be really disillusioned if you hung out with me, because at 5 o'clock, I'm checking my email. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just be honest. Do I wish I was first thing reading in scripture? Yeah, I'm on Gmail. I'm just checking, what I missed in the last 8 hours of sleep. But I think that endears people to us. I think people are starving and craving authenticity, but the gap is our fear and our insecurity
100%. I
that
think we've
prevents
seen
what
too
people
much
want in
of,
the first place.
yeah. There's two, when I'm doing my teaching workshops or our own leadership pipeline, we're bringing up leaders here. I said, hey, what makes a great communicator? It's two things: authenticity and vulnerability. That's it. It's authenticity and then vulnerability. People don't trust anymore because we
Mm-mm.
live in this climate where we see how the mighty have fallen. We see the show and now the documentary of what's happening behind the show. So we don't trust leadership anymore, especially in church. And it has earned, unfortunately, over the last 40 years, a lot of distrust from our culture. And so people come in naturally not willing to trust. So they need to hear about, who are you? You got to be
I,
authentic and vulnerable. And this week, you mentioned ugly sweaters. I mentioned how we're supposed to love with Christ's love, love each other as I have loved you. And I said, guys, you don't want me to love you with Chris's love. I got terrible love. My love is egotistical. It's one sided. It's always selfish. I'm looking for what I get in return. I go ask my wife. She's sitting right there. I'm a lousy lover. And I caught myself saying it. And I said, yeah, I just mentioned that publicly. I'm a lousy lover. I said, on stage, the bigger the crowd, the more comfortable I get. I'm open. I'm emotional. I'm vulnerable. I said, you get me off stage. And my wife is like, so why don't you connect with me? And I'm like, oh, I got to do that. But that's why God created Sports Center, so I don't have to connect with anybody after work. And I said, this is the battle I have. And I said, this is what all of it goes. I'm talking about Christ's love in us and through us. Um, and it was just a happen by thing. That's just the way I talk. It is amazing after that message how many fist bumps I got from dudes walking by going, lousy lover, huh? And just thinking, I'm like, yeah. But how many wives are saying, thank you for giving me hope?
yeah,
I've married a
absolutely.
guy like you. And I
Yep.
thought, well, Chris and Amy, they got it all. Now, listen, we got the best marriage that I know of. She is an amazing woman. It's 95% due to her. 70% Holy Spirit, 30% Amy. I'm not a part of it. Uh, but yeah, it's that openness of saying, yeah, this is why I need Christ. And this is why you need Christ. If you throw yourself as the first one in the boat, people will line up to get in the boat with you. You want to preach at people, they'll turn you off.
I don't remember where I read the statistic of the last 4 to 6 weeks, but for US anyway, 19% of people, only 19% of people trust pastors. And
I thought
that
that's high.
well, yeah, I mean,
19%?
that's what the number said. And I thought I wasn't shocked by it, but
Yeah.
I leaned towards the idea that it was potentially high as well. I'm not sure 19% of the people in the church trust me, and I'm really, I mean, there's not much I don't. I mean, I wasn't that long
Yeah.
ago. I said, listen, let me tell you about how I cussed God out multiple times this week,
Mm.
and with language that you would have, washed my mouth out with soap. And, people are like, can you do that?
I
I'm
haven't
like,
gone there.
I'm like, listen, if your God's not big enough to be cussed out, you need a bigger God
Mm.
because he didn't have any problem with it. And so there may be ramifications later, but at the moment, and I went ahead and told people.
Yeah.
And so no one's ever shocked and no one's ever turned away. As far as I know, no one's ever got up and walked out. And, you know, I might have missed them with the spotlight, but I don't think they've walked out. So
Yeah.
going back to brownies with the Browns, because I don't have a name that rhymes with anything, that's not going to work
Mm.
for me. Where's the line? You just said vulnerability and authenticity, which is really interesting because there's a lot of interplay between those words. And I get
Oh, they're
pastors
hand
who
in glove.
yeah, I get pastors
Yeah.
who say, listen, authenticity, just a trend word, just trendy, Brene Brown, it's not, I actually get, you would be shocked. You probably won't be shocked at this, but you've taken my survey. And one of the questions is, how important is authenticity to you as a pastor? I
Hmm.
literally get people who say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1. How can it be a 1? Did you read the question backward? How can authenticity not be important to you as a pastor? I actually had a guy last week, say, I don't think authenticity is a skill or a biblical practice pastors need to worry about. If you got into ministry for authenticity, you're in the wrong profession.
Mm.
I'm still trying to swallow that answer, right? Because everything I do in life is studying this issue and trying to then preach what I practice. But between authenticity, vulnerability, and transparency, because there are nuanced difference, but you're right, they're hand in glove. Where do you, because I think just simply saying authenticity is who you are on the inside, your core values line up with who you portray. That's the big.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is the courage to show the gap. But transparency is the choice of how much we share. Where do you draw that line? How do you know? What's the boundary for Chris Brown on transparency?
Yeah. There's, I think we got to understand when we say it, because if I would have written your survey, I would have written your question differently. I would
Mm-hmm.
have written it, how important is authenticity for pastors? Either a
Mm-hmm.
9 or a 10. I wouldn't have given you a 1 through 8. I would have just said, is it 9 or 10? You're not allowed to put 1. It's not on the survey, guys. Is it 9 or is it 10? I mean, it boggles me too. I look at it and go, how can you? But here's the problem. It's not just what your congregation needs to feel like they can connect with you and really have some matter of trust with you. More importantly, and this is to what you do and in your whole ministry, it is your own personal health. Authenticity is the air a pastor breathes to be healthy. Because if I'm not being authentic, then I'm portraying something I can't live up to. I'm portraying something I can't naturally be. And so for me, authenticity started as a default early on in my ministry because I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't spiritual enough, I wasn't educated enough, and I wasn't well read enough or an intellectual to be able to pull off the messages. And so I'm a youth pastor in the inner city. I got a little puppet show. I do narrative teaching. I'm a storyteller. It works for students. The problem happens when the senior pastor says, hey, uh, I want you to teach for me when I'm gone on the weekend. And that's coming up. And I'm trying to figure out, oh my gosh, these aren't inner city kids. This is
How do
like,
how
now
do I
this is,
do this without puppets?
oh, this is Moses and Abraham and Sarah, and these are the patriarchs. And it was a 130-year-old Baptist church up in LA, and most of the original members were still there. And so I was like, I'm teaching this crowd. And as I got close to it, I realized as I'm trying to put together a message that sounds like what a pastor should sound like, I can't pull it off. I don't have 4 points that start with the same letter. I'm not going to preach a text. I'm not, man, I am dying on the vine here. And so I get to the Saturday before Sunday and I throw in the towel and I go with one of my narratives, knowing I'm going to be laughed off the stage, or what's going to happen is people are going to go, wow, that was really good for the youth. I'm glad he's the youth guy. Let's not use him in the big house anymore. And that was going to be worst case scenario. I could live with that. What I couldn't live with is anything else. Trying to be spiritual, trying to be an intellectual, trying to be a pastor, I was going to fail. So I went to my default. What amazed me was the response from a lot of gray haired people afterwards that, well, this is a story I've heard my whole life and I've never seen it like that. I've never felt it like that. Man, I hope Glenn uses you again next time he's out of town. And I was like, what? This isn't supposed to work. So for me, the beginning of authenticity was realizing maybe I can be me. Because I think that's the problem with most pastors. We're trying to live up to an internal voice of what a pastor should be, ought to say, ought to wear, ought to dress like, where he ought to stand, where he or she ought to. And it's this internal voice. And we got to stop and go, if God called you, he really wants you. I fell backwards into that going, I'm not good enough to try to pretend to be something else. So I just started to be me. And here's what I realized: I can live up to being me. And I kind of really like being me. And so
Yeah.
authenticity is the freedom I need when people come and go, we're looking for a teaching a little bit more. And I'm like, oh, here's 3 churches in the area. They got that type of teaching. Or, Pastor, we really hope that you're going to be the guy. I go, first of all, we don't use the P word here. It's just kind of odd. And I'm not going to be that. If you take our brownies with the Browns, you would have known we're not going to be political, or we're not going to do big holiday. We're not going to do, but here's some churches in the area. It gives me to go, this is who I am. And the only type of pastor you can really be is the type of pastor you authentically are. And so when you're inauthentic, you are portraying something to your people that you're not. There's going to be a lack of trust and a lack of connection. And you are putting something out there that you cannot healthy be because it's not you.
Has
There's a rant.
inauthenticity Yeah. His inauthenticity. I have a really tough time because I try to always write and communicate in a way that I'm not trying to tell pastors, I think you're inauthentic and full of crap. Okay.
Yeah.
My default is that you're not. My fallback is you probably weren't when you started ministry. And then the truth is, within 2 to 3 years, you learn to play the game. And that could be completely wrong. However, I don't think it is. I quite often think that it's not that pastors are not authentic. They just don't know that they can be, or they've never found a place to be in the local church they're afraid of. Because, first of all,
Yeah.
their vocation's tied to it, their identity's tied to it, their self esteem, self confidence, self worth is all tied to it. And so, all of a sudden, if I am criticized, condemned, or whatever for exposing myself, obviously figuratively, then it's a house of cards
Yeah.
and it just falls down. And so I've only been doing this for 33 years. So I can't go back any further than that in my experience. But isn't authenticity an issue, and has it grown?
Mm.
Or is it not an issue and it's just the loneliness of inauthenticity that's the real plague? Because I think they're tied together.
They are. I mean, authenticity is the issue because without it, you create this false sense. You separate yourself, like you talked about, and there's a loneliness. Why are you lonely? Because people don't know you. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because you've kept them from knowing the real you. And every time you're around your people, then you got to live up to who they think you are, and it's killing you. If pastors, women and men, just realized if God called you, He really, really wants you. He didn't call you and then go, man, now I got to make you to be something that you're not. Now I got to make you portray something that you're not. He really, really wants you. And you're only going to reach the type of people that your personality is going to reach anyway. So if you try to reach people with something you're not going to keep them. You're not going to keep them happy and they're going to make you miserable. So the
Right.
secret of that success and authenticity is the more you can generally be you, the more successful you're going to be in your calling. And the more, like I said, people are going to know you. And I can live up to being Chris. Anything else I try to do on stage, if I try to pretend like I know Greek or I know Hebrew because I researched it that week and I learned the pronunciation, and so now I can say it on stage. Now I got people coming to me asking me Greek questions, and I'm like, oh, hey, I don't understand. Just something I found on Logos this week. And so the more you can go, hey, let me give you a Greek, by the way. Studied it once a long time ago, forgot all of it. I had to look it up. I even played the little voice thing to know how to pronounce it so I could sound cool. Say it, get over it. People laugh. They're glad you studied. They think and chuckle, and they go, good. God doesn't know Greek. I'm not going to bring my Greek question to him then. And you can be you because God really called you. He really wants you, not this internal voice of what we think a pastor should be like, just like. It's crazy. When we're inauthentic, it creates the problem on both sides of the coin, the audience and us.
As any good former youth pastor, I've got a Hebrew tattoo. And not any
Man,
good
I was a
former youth
terrible youth
pastor.
pastor then.
Did you have a goatee? Did you at least have a goatee
Oh,
back in the
I got my
90s?
goatee. I had
Yeah. So,
yeah, my
well,
ponytail at one point.
I did too. I interviewed my first church with a ponytail, and somebody brought it up. Now, we interviewed at a church where my wife had to interview with me, which that would never happen in my church. I'm not hiring your wife. I don't
Yeah.
I don't care about your spouse, male or female. And so someone asked, like, what about the ponytail? And my wife, who was a middle school teacher, she spoke up. She said, listen, if the worst thing your kid ever comes back and does is like grow long hair, she wanted to speak to that question. All the other questions she
Yeah.
didn't answer. But when I got my, Hebrew tattoo, people said, how do you know what it means? Like, how do you know what you actually spelled it right? I said, it's simple. I was in the Bible Museum in DC one day, and there's a rabbi sitting there writing Torah out for a synagogue someplace in the country. And I said, hey, could you just tell me how to spell this correctly so I don't, like, have something that says beware of dog or something on my arm, instead of something about
Yeah.
God. So I can't pretend to be that expert. And so many things I'm not an expert on. I have no problem admitting it and being transparent about it. But where's the line? I'm going to take you back to it because I think it's important for people to hear. Where's the line for you
Oh yeah.
between transparency and privacy?
When I go home and shut my door, that's just privacy. But I believe, and this is me, I don't think I'm going to put this on any other pastors because of the hypocrisy I saw growing up that was rampant in the churches we attended. It's why I distrust churches. I don't like pastors, and I just don't like Christianity. So when God pulled me back into it in my 20s was the most laughable thing because everyone knew, dude, the guy hates pastors and churches for good reason. I was abused under an evangelical Christian flag and religion and by a pastor. So the whole thing's just a sham. So when God called me back, for me, it was, well, then I'm going to do it different. And so for me, it was, if I'm going to stand in front of people and say, this is how you live life, and this is what the Bible says, you have the right to know anything about me. You just do. Now, I'm still going to have private time with my wife. We're still going to go on vacation, and you're not invited. But if you want to know anything about my finances or what we did on vacation or where we went or what we ate or what we drank or the kids go, you're welcome to it. What if there's something that I go, ooh, my church can't know, then I probably shouldn't do. And so I share, we're just open books. When I was dating Amy, I go, you got to know this. My calling on my life. And again, I thought I'd only do youth ministry, inner city my whole life. I go, you got to know this. I'm going to live a life and on that stage, and we've got to live in a glass house. We will not have behind closed doors secrets. We just can't. It kills ministry. I've seen it my whole life, and I can't be one of those guys. So that's for me. I don't know if I'm putting that on anybody else, but for me, if I'm going to stand in front of the people of God and use the gift He's given me, I can't imagine in my mind why they couldn't know anything about what we're doing. I'm
I
living off of your funds. I'm living off of your donations. I'm living a life in front of you. Ask me. I mean, Jesus lived and walked with the disciples. They didn't just come out twice a week and visit his castle. It was on the road day and night, sleeping with amongst a life of ministry. And I go, that was everything. In fact, behind closed doors, he even got more transparent with them, not closed off. He's like,
right.
they're like, oh, we don't understand the parable. He goes, let me tell you what that whole thing was about. It's just open, full exposure and disclosure with them.
And yet I think there's an interesting I think if I'm not stretching too far, I think the Mount of Transfiguration is an interesting story that may indicate there's times there's a few people you can even take a little deeper.
Oh yeah,
Maybe
let's take Peter, James, and John up the mountain.
and maybe it's just because sometimes, well, I'm completely fine. I really am completely fine being open and honest and transparent with whatever in my life. I have nothing to hide. But sometimes my transparency might be too much for you to handle.
Yes,
And
and I
so
tell
that's
pastors, look, I can say, hey, so when Amy and I get in arguments, here's what we need to do. That's different than, hey, last night Amy and I got in the biggest fight. She's still not talking to me. There is a distance of when do you share scars versus when
mhm,
do you share current wounds. And
yeah.
I give guys, hey, if you're working out some of this stuff in your life, I'd love to share my scars. Your current wounds, you might not be in a place to share those. You might not have worked through it yet. And this may be more therapeutic on your end than any help for your church. So there is a little bit of a distance that I think is some wisdom of, ooh, I love sharing when Amy and I talked about divorce and we started giving reasons why we were going to get divorced. That was 26 years ago at 9 months into our marriage. It's a
Hmm.
powerful story to hear your pastor talk about how we worked through that. When I say, hey guys, we're talking on love today, this has been a tough week because Thursday night, Amy brought up that she wanted to get divorced. And now I'm here talking to you about love. And so we're going to talk about how this works together. Nah, I don't
No.
think that's the timing on that one.
Yeah, timing. I think timing's critical. Boundaries are critical. Sensitive information, right? And there's just. I remember a few years ago, I was having a conversation with my one of my older brothers, And he had shared some information with me about his business. And I was kind of on the inside of what he was doing. He's got this growing entrepreneurial business and making money. And I was in a conversation a couple of days later with my father, and I just, in conversation, told him something about my brother's business that I'm pretty sure I was the only one of two or three people to know. I wasn't going, "Hey, I got this information you don't." It just kind of, I wasn't using discernment. My phone rings and my brother says, "Hey, did you tell Dad about this, and this?" I said, I think I did, man. I didn't mean to. He goes, "Need to know, bro.
Yeah.
Need to know." And I got thinking about that just a couple of weeks ago. There are times people need to know because it helps them through their hell, their turmoil, their situation. But I think
Yeah.
what you just said is really good wisdom, and that is past scars more than current turmoil is probably a really good boundary. There's other times just in my own personal life. I mean, I've got really good relationships. You do too. A lot of pastors don't have the kind of intimate relationships and friendships that I think you and I have. But there are times I need you to know because I just don't want to carry this anymore. And it's not about other people's baggage that I receive as their pastor. It's my own baggage. And I need somebody to carry this with me, to be a sounding board for me. So lately in the last couple of weeks, I've been writing and thinking about transparency. That need to know idea has popped up. And I thought, what is the line though? Where's the discretion of when I need you to know? Again, I don't have anything to hide, but that doesn't mean I have to share everything because there can be times my privacy is healthy. When is my privacy unhealthy?
Yeah. And I think some of that too comes to, hey, my wife doesn't want some stuff shared, and
That's right.
she's above this church. I have three kids. There are illustrations at times that I'm like, I'm going to use this, and it would kill my kid. My
Oh yeah.
11-year-old daughter does not need to be the spectacle that the church is talking about. Early on, I saw this done poorly in some lives. And so when my kids were real young, I would tell them, hey, if dad ever uses you as an illustration, you get $5. And they're like, whoa. And I'll always ask permission. Hey, I'm going to tell you about the time that we were hunting spiders and you dropped the flashlight and ran. He's like, okay. And you're going to get $5. By the time they got into sixth grade, they had upped it to $20. And then there was a time that I caught an argument between a son and daughter screaming and yelling about who copied whose drawing. And I recorded it. And they didn't know I was recording this. And
What'd
it's
that cost
amazing
you?
for this series we were getting to. It was $50,
Yeah.
but it was so good. And then they got something out of it. So my kids have always been in on it. And there has been numerous times where either I didn't even ask because I knew the answer was no, or I ask and they're like, no, no. And I'm like, great,
Yeah.
great.
That's a
And
really
so
that's a really good
those two
nugget.
ministries have got to supersede your platform.
Always. I've made the mistake, not very often, because I'm married to a seventh grade school teacher, and she snaps at me. And I'm like, don't snap
Oh,
at me. Well, quit acting like a seventh grader. She's been in the seventh grade classroom for 36 years. And I said something one time from the pulpit about our marriage and our sexual life before our marriage, and which was healthy, for anyone listening. Which, if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't tell you, but it was. And she said,
yeah,
"I don't care if our sex life before marriage was healthy or not. It is not anyone's business. You know, our
yeah.
promiscuity or lack of promiscuity is not anyone's business." When I was writing, uh, my last book was called "Alone Sucks."
Mm,
It's Genesis 2:18. It's a very
hmm.
loose translation of the Hebrew "alone sucks," where it says
Yeah,
it's not good
yeah,
for man to be alone, but that's how good my Hebrew is, right? And so I was writing a story about when we first met, and she got to read it all. And she says, "There's no way you are putting that in there for thousands of people to read." So I had to give her that same permission because I thought, well, it was a very good illustration of what
yeah,
I was trying to prove, but it wasn't healthy for her. It
yeah,
violated her boundaries. So the only thing for me that I think when transparency is unhealthy or the lack of transparency, it was when I use it to avoid accountability. And this is
Help me with that.
well, what my lack of say my lack of transparency. So
Oh,
I'm gonna keep something to myself, not because
yeah,
I don't think you need to know or I need you to know. It's because if you know, there's accountability that goes with that.
yeah,
And that's, I mean, that's true for anybody, pastors, anybody. But I think that's usually where we use the lack of transparency or authenticity, vulnerability, wrap them all together is our excuse. Sometimes it's not just fear of what other people think, it's fear that I'm going to get my hand caught in a cookie jar,
yeah,
get my ass handed to me here. Because, well, okay, then you really need to potentially consider your role in the first place.
yep,
No one expects you to be righteous unless you go back to the mystique that we place on ourselves. But if you're going to preach righteousness, then you better make sure you practice what you preach or don't preach it and just go, listen, I could talk on this issue, except I struggle here.
yeah,
And I think, like you said, people fist bump you on the way out because they're like, dude, thank you for sharing that. It's not
yeah,
just me.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think 100%. I think we got an area in our life where we don't want to share because we know there's going to be consequences. That is simply the conviction of the Holy Spirit telling you, you better be the one that puts those consequences on you. Clean it up, ship up, or shape out. I mean, shape up, ship out, whatever that is. And just go, hey, there's an area in your life that you know is standing in the way of the Spirit fully using you, or the Spirit still using you, but you're not being fulfilled. And there's no drier, deader place to be in life than being in ministry where you're simply being used by the Spirit and not fulfilled. It is a lonely, desolate, dank, scorching wilderness of barren wasteland, where we are doing the work of God, but I'm not being used. I'm not being fulfilled. I know why. And it's just, man, what a lonely, isolating place.
Well, I want to go back to my research just a minute that I'm doing right now for both the authentic pastor, but primarily finishing my PhD. That's only taken me 15 years and thousands of dollars to defer year after year after year after year. And you know, Cindy's like, "Are you almost done with your dissertation? Because this is like cost us a wing to the house.
Yeah.
You are gonna finish this once and for all." But I get pastors who answer on a scale of 1 to 10, how lonely are you? And it's 8, 9, 10. I can almost
Mm,
always guarantee you that like the fourth or fifth answer down says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how transparent do you feel like you can be with your congregation? It's the opposite. If they give me
yeah.
a 9, it's going to be a 2. If they give me an 8, it's going to be a 3.
Yeah.
And my heart breaks for that, Pastor Chris, because some of those are listening to our conversation and eavesdropping on us. And from your experience,
Mm,
what do we say to the listener who thinks we're full of crap? They can't imagine living as exposed as we're suggesting. They wouldn't even know where to begin because they've been conditioned for so long to wear that mask and don that facade. What small significant step from your experience would you encourage them to take first if they're in that pit of loneliness and despair or that feeling of inauthenticity?
yeah. I think first thing, um, if they are the critic right now saying we're full of crap, this isn't the way to do it, then I would say, okay, just look at the fruit. You're hearing from two guys that are living the fruit of an authentic, vulnerable openness in ministry. Now, if you say, I have a different way of doing it where I'm not authentic, I'm not going to be vulnerable, and the fruit of your way of doing it is, and I've got a lot of friends, I'm really known, I'm living healthy, the burden isn't heavy, it is light. And I'm like, okay, then keep doing what you're doing. Maybe you got
Mm-hmm.
another way of doing it that works for you, and your
Right.
congregation loves you. They have high trust in you. You are known by them and go, man, this is the most phenomenal place I've ever been. Then
Sure.
just keep doing what you're doing. There
Yep.
may be different ways. And I've never been a guy that said Chris's way is the way. In fact,
Right.
Chris's way usually is not the way. It just works for me. I would say to the guy though that goes, look at the fruit, and you go, I get it. I don't have real relationships. I don't feel that. Me not being authentic, I feel like I'm inauthentic as a leader then. I go, well, of course you are. I would tell you, just start today being you. When I do a little teaching workshop, I challenge guys, start wearing what you want to wear on the weekend. Why are you wearing a coat and tie? Because the last three guys wore coat and ties. Well, do you want to do everything according to what happened in the 60s? No. There's a way to change. Why are you still standing behind a large pulpit and you can't move more than one arm's length away? Because that's the way it was. And go, what is birthed in you? What type of leader do you want to be? Start taking steps there. Start teaching the way you want to teach. Start dressing the way you want to dress. Start being the authentic you that God has called you to be. What are those moves you can just start moving? I did this. I was teaching for a while at Bethel Seminary. The Minneapolis St. Paul had a campus down here in San Diego. And for the last about 13, 14 years, they gave me the privilege of teaching a teaching class with them. Because like you, I never finished any of my higher degrees. I had to be called an adjunct, and they apologized for that. And I said, don't apologize. I should never even be adjunct. You shouldn't have me anywhere on your university. But I would teach this teaching workshop with these guys in this class as part of their seminary degree. And I still remember this guy from I can give a location. I still remember this guy from Central California coming back, waited till class was over, and with his cohort, and he simply said, I got to tell you what happened Sunday. And I said, what happened Sunday? He said, I'm still teaching with coat and tie. I'm still teaching behind the big wood pulpit. But because of what we've been learning here, I got to the end of my message and I said, now I just feel like I want to share with you. The preaching's over. I just want to share something with you. And he said, I took off my coat. I laid it on the choir loft. I loosened my tie. And he goes, I stepped out from behind the pulpit and I sat down on the top steps leading up to the holy altar. And he goes, I spent the last 5 minutes just sharing with my church what this message meant to me and what I hoped it would do to them. I said, how'd it go? He went to answer me, and that's when the lips started quivering and the tears started coming down. He said the line of people afterwards that said for the first time they felt like they really connected with their pastor. And he goes, Chris, that 5 minutes sitting on the steps without a coat and just loosening my tie was the most freedom I've ever experienced on stage in my church. He has been living up to this internal idea of what a pastor should be, ought to wear, ought to act like in front of his congregation. And he's been living up to this old mystique, this holy myth. And for the first time he experienced, I said, so what's next week going to look like? He's all, there's going to be no tie. He goes, I think I'll keep the jacket for a while. He's all, but that's going to come off too. I go, how many people in your church wear a coat and tie? He goes, me and a couple deacons. I go, why do they wear a coat and tie? He's all, because the pastor wears a coat and tie. I go, what are you
Exactly.
doing? What are you doing? And it's that, if that's you out there, just step into the person, the man or woman God has called you to be. Start playing you. And the only type of church you can ever authentically lead is the type of church that you want to go to. Anything else is a farce. Anything else you can't live up to. Just go, what makes you come alive? Start being you.
And if people aren't happy with you being you, you know what? There's a church down the road for them.
Yes.
And
You
that's
weren't going to keep them
fine.
happy anyway. Yeah.
You were never going to keep them happy.
No.
Small significant steps. I've been saying lately that and maybe I'm wrong, that we're in a new era of ministry.
Yeah.
And the only
You're not
reason I
wrong.
say that is because we live in a world where people have been lied to, duped, and played for long enough by leaders and institutions that authenticity is so countercultural, it's attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And the church who leads and the pastor who leads with authenticity, vulnerability, and transparency stands out and stands above.
Yeah.
It can't be your shtick or it's not authentic. But
Yep.
I happen to believe, and I don't know empirical data to back this up, the decline of authenticity can reflects the decline of the Western Church.
Mm-hmm.
And the increase in authenticity moving forward may be the rejuvenation that we've been praying for. That's not another church growth strategy or trend or tactic. It's pastors taking off their tie, whatever that means for you, and connecting with people who don't wear a tie anyway, that just want to know that you preach what you practice.
Yeah.
Because I believe that endears people, and in a culture that is starving for genuine, the church can lead the way on that. Maybe in a way that we haven't in a few decades. Maybe.
Yeah. I'm with you on that.
I hope that's the case. I hope that's the case, and I'm not just drinking my own Kool-Aid. So
No, you're not. And again, we talk so much about what the congregation want, what people want. I will play the other side of the coin and talk to whatever pastor leader is out there listening. Ma'am, sir, let me promise you, it's what you want. You can be you. You can unapologetically be you, and you can live up to that. Anything else you can't live up to. Anything else is a facade that you have to try to manufacture. Anything else is a fear that one day the rug's going to be pulled out from under you, and they're going to find out how spiritual, how smart, how intellectual you really are, and it's all going to come crashing down. And when you can, again, I wish I was smart enough to know early on this is what leadership is. No, I was so dumb. I didn't have anything I could go to. I couldn't try to be something else. And so every time the pastor kept calling me to, hey, you're going to speak another weekend, I just went back to what I was. And over the course of the next couple of years up in LA, it hit me. I'm just supposed to be who I am. This works on every level. And on the people that don't, we're not big on the storytelling, and we're not big on your narrative. I'm like, well, I couldn't keep you if I tried. That's all I got. So, yeah, go somewhere else. There's a lot of churches for a lot of people. You are called to reach the people that you are supposed to reach. So, when you're trying to be something else or someone else, you're not living up to your calling either, because you're fishing for fish that you're not supposed to catch.
yeah, I think we've repeated that a couple of times, and I'm glad I want to end on that, because if pastors can embrace what you just said, you get to celebrate being who God made you.
Oh,
What a miserable way to live, to pretend to be something
yeah.
else. So, when we
And
first
you get to
talked,
be
just
with a congregation that really, really likes you. All these
yeah,
people here, why? Because they love my teaching, they love me. Isn't that arrogant, egotistical? No, that's what God's called me to do. And you know why? Because I'm so me that all the people that don't like it, they've left. And good, they're in churches, they're Christians. I'll see them in heaven. We'll all get along then. But until then, I get to be with a group of people that I know they know me, they know Amy, they know Selah, Karis, and Barrick. They know my family, they know my past, they know our marriage, and they really, really love us. But here's the kicker: they really like us. And I get to be with a congregation that really, really likes me, because I've shown him me and I haven't been rejected. And now we do this Christian life together. See, that's the joy. When in Matthew, is it Matthew 11, where Jesus says, for my burden is easy, my yoke is light? It's laughable. If you're in ministry and you're like, oh, the burden's, man, it's overburdened. It is so heavy. This isn't light. Then you've got to stop and go, then you're doing it wrong. Either Jesus is a liar or you're doing it wrong. And when we get into ministry that's not authentically us, we're carrying this heavy burden, this load, and I'm like, guys, then you're doing it wrong. We should be just completely authentically being us. This is who Jesus loves. All my junk is what Jesus died for. I still have a purpose today. And with that, I get to do it with people that really get to know and like me and love me and my family. And we can do this together. Anything else is going to be burdensome, and it's going to be heavy. I'm
the only
preaching.
thing,
I'm done.
well, unfortunately, the only thing I didn't get today was actually brownies.
Yeah.
I got the whole spiel, I got the rant, I got the
No,
authenticity, I got the vulnerability, but bro, I didn't get the brownies.
it's
And
because
so,
you missed it. You've completely missed it. Brownies are with the Browns, not Brown. It's not brownies with Brown.
oh,
You
I
got
got
to
to have
get the
the whole crew there.
Browns. Yeah,
Well,
yeah. The
I just
brownies
got
come
the
with the Browns.
I just got the litany of names. So when I find my way to San Diego and in a fishing boat and get to meet the whole family, we'll
Come
have
on.
we'll have we'll have the bluefin tuna and the brownies.
Oh,
But
Tim, it's a happy day on that day.
I just knew, man, from our first encounter together that our friendship would grow, and I knew we had to do this podcast. And I know it's crazy. We're just a week before Christmas, and I can't thank you enough for taking time to hang out with me today, man.
I love what you're doing. If this in any way encourages someone to find what I have found to be the world's greatest loser, the biggest idiot, I can fall right behind Paul and then probably Peter. And then there's Chris. I mean, I wasn't killing Christians and I didn't deny Jesus while he was getting the smack beat out of him. But boy, am I garbage. And in spite of that, I'm called son. I'm given a role to play. He just wants me to be me authentically. It is such a great life. And if that can encourage others to get out of who you're trying to be, and back into who God has made you. I'm so glad you're doing this, my friend. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be a very small voice in the midst of your ministry.
Yeah. Well, hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. Chris Brown is the pastor of North Coast Church in San Diego, and much more than one campus and ministry. You've heard his heartbeat today. Appreciate you listening to the Authentic Pastor. Take one small step today. We'll see you soon.